Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restore the glory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob. Good to see you and be with you. I am excited because we have some very dear guests who have joined us today in our series on adoption. So, Bob, these people are near and dear to your heart, and they're wonderful. So, Bob, introduce who's with us today.
Yeah, I'm already feeling the emotion of doing this together. This is my sister, Kathy, who is a year and a half younger than me. And we grew up together and lived in the same town for many years. My brother-in-law, Nick, who I've known since he was 15, and we started playing football together back in high school. And eventually he and Kathy met, and we'll tell some of that story. We're also joined by my nephew, Brian, who I just met this year.
Wow.
And that's part of the story that we want to tell.
So did I just hear that right? Let's make sure that's clear. You have a nephew you just met this year.
Yeah, a 48-year-old nephew that I just met this year.
Okay, all right. So we're going to get there. That's an exciting story. Nick and Kathy, can you give us a little bit of background about, so you guys met, you fell in love, and I'm going to move past a little bit of that, which I'm sure is an amazing part of the story. And if I'm missing something, tell me. But as soon as I heard 48-year-old nephew who just met, I'm like, what the hell? I want to hear this. So what happened? Because obviously we're in an adoption series. So I can't imagine the decisions and what would have happened for you guys to decide to, have a child be given for adoption. So maybe there's some backstory you know better than me that we need to hear, but where do you want to start with this whole thing and your son who's sitting here with you?
Probably starting with we were in high school, met at 15, and that was our sophomore year. And in my senior year, somewhere around graduation, we were trying to think of that, or right after graduation, found out that I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that was shocking. I was asking Nick the other day what his feelings were, but in hearing the news, or if he remembered the call, because there's a lot of this that I don't remember clearly, but not telling a lot of people. I don't even know who the first person, Nick was the first person I told. But it was a while before I told my mom. Actually, we were on a trip to go visit an aunt, and I told her on the auto train because I didn't think she would be able to yell at me or get real upset. It was a controlled environment. So I remember telling her in her shock. And then when we went to see my aunt, we shared that news with her, and she shared it with another aunt. You know how that goes while we were there. And they introduced the idea of adoption. So that's where the seed got planted. And for me, or for us, abortion was never a question. Being brought up Catholic, I had my own, certainly the foundation, but already my own guilt about even having, sex before marriage, and this being a first relationship, that was very difficult. And there was, a lot of emotion with that. So adoption seed got planted, and one of my aunts was on the phone with me while we were at that visit and shared about some of her friends that couldn't have children, and what a blessing in their lives having an adopted child or children. So,
wow.
Nick, how about you? What you want to share? What your experience was?
It started, I'm in Mr. Cruz's Spanish class in 10th grade. And I look across the yard and I see this girl that I had never seen before. The school we were attending was a small school. So, you pretty much kind of were familiar with everybody there. And I see this girl and I was like, who is this? She was very attractive. So the bell rings and I go running out of Mr. Cruz's class because I want to intercept her before class starts, and introduce myself. So that was the beginning. And we started calling each other and hanging out and going steady, I guess you could say, back in the day. Fast forward, she calls me. I think we had just graduated. It was right around graduation time. We were 17, and she calls me and she tells me she's pregnant. And I was stunned. I didn't see that coming, in my immaturity. And it was a whirlwind for me. I was lost. Where do we go? What do we do? At the time, I was living with my father and his wife, and I kept this to myself for a while. And then I finally brought it to their attention that Kathy was pregnant. And my father was kind of numb. He was kind of nonverbal. He didn't have much to say, and I never received advice from my dad on suggestions. Hey, let's talk about this. It was kind of the relationship we had was kind of distant. His wife felt strongly that we should keep the baby. So that was a somewhat of an influence to consider. I remember vividly the option of abortion being discussed between Kathy and I, and just immediately, we both knew at the time that this is not an option. We can't do that. We're not going to do that. So it was never even a consideration for us. So before long, the decision was made. We were going to go ahead and have this son and go through the adoption process. And that's what we did. So we formally gave him up for adoption. I'll never forget, while Kathy was nearing birth and delivery, I was able to visit her. We had time in the hospital together. When Brian was born, we got to see him and hold him. And I remember very vividly the act of that being official now, and we were leaving the hospital. It was wrenching.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, what really touches me is seeing the picture of the two of you kissing him. What was that like?
For me, that moment was like, I have a son. And that reality never left. I always had a son. It took, as we'll get into the story, it took years to become reunited, and what a story that is. So he was always there. He was always present. We celebrated his birthday. We prayed for him on his birthdays. We thought about him. We went on to have 3 children. We let them know fairly early on that you have a brother and describe for them the circumstances of the adoption.
Wow.
Yeah, Nick, can you talk a little bit about the anguish of that moment of saying goodbye?
Yeah, some level of anguish was always there. It started walking out of the hospital, and the moment of I'll never see him again. That was the anguish of that. As hard as it was for me, it was probably, I don't know, being a mother, more difficult for Kathy. And part of that process was me, trying to support her emotionally. And, I cared deeply for Kathy at that time. And so this was a journey that we took starting that moment together.
Yeah. Kathy, how long was it until... Well, 2 questions, Kathy. When you and Nick aren't married yet at this point, when did you get married, and what was this like for you? So just quick, can you give me very quickly the context? How long after giving Brian up for adoption did you guys get married?
6 years.
Yep.
6 years.
So you kept dating and were still in a relationship for 6 more years before you got married?
Yes.
Or on and off?
On and off. Yes, mostly on.
Okay.
We, originally both of us had applied to colleges and we're going to college, and Nick was going to go up in Pennsylvania and I was going to go in Florida. I wasn't sure which of the 2 schools that I was accepted to. So that first year, well, we had a year that he was born that we were both in town. And then the next year, the next fall, we both went to college in different places. So the first few times we saw each other, it was very painful because it was that memory. And I remember seeing each other, and it just all I could feel was the pain of our loss and our son.
Yes.
So thanks be to God, we got through that period. After a year being at different colleges, I believe it was, Nick came to where I was at school. And we, continued. And of course, our relationship grew from there.
So can you go back for a second? Because I'm hearing just something that I've never thought about before in your guys' particular relationship, which is you have this gut-wrenching experience. Like, I have 3 kids. I cannot imagine what that must have been like for the two of you. And then your relationship separates. Like, there's like 2 deep like separations that are going on, because once you have a child together, the bond there is astronomical. So you have a child together, and you wonderfully give Brian up for adoption, but then you two split in a way for a chunk of time. So Kathy, talk to us about what was that like to give Brian to another family, and then what happened when you and Nick kind of separated as well? Did it echo each other? Like, so first, what was that like with Brian in the hospital?
Part of the other reason for the decision was my mom being a single mom with 7 children, just divorced, just moved. And one of her first responses, there's no way I can help take care of and feed another person.
Oh, wow.
And Nick and I both were from divorced families, and we knew that young marriages, the statistics and all that kind of stuff. So that was part of the decision as well. So we were fairly convinced that this was the right decision, and had the belief that he would be better off without us as parents. Nick was an orderly, I'm a Publix cashier, So the process, I was preparing through the pregnancy mentally for that. Physically, obviously, an 17-year-old, in a first pregnancy was a lot. In the hospital, we were given a choice. We met with the Catholic Social Services as a couple to, give input on what kind of family we wanted Brian to have. So there was some processing along the way. But in the hospital, we did have a choice and asked to hold him. And, back then they didn't have the rooming in where the baby's with you the whole time. So they would bring the baby out, whatever. So we had many of those times. And, part of me was probably numb and trying to detach a little bit, but feeling the love automatically and the attachment. So it was the beginning of a long, dark journey. When we left the hospital, my mom came to pick us up, and Nick was there, and Brian was just circumcised. And he was at that time, they had one nursery, right? And Brian was in the back, and he was crying. And I can vividly remember seeing him, and it just tore me up that I couldn't go comfort him, that I was walking out. So that was a horrible, horrible experience. Very, very, a lot of pain. So your question was from there and shadowing, I had days of not sleeping. Crazy as it was, labor at that point was in a room other people were in with curtains, and I was medicated even without my choice. And I was in labor reading the book Sybil. Crazy as that is. I don't know why.
For those who don't know, Sybil's a woman with multiple personality disorders and her treatment.
That was a popular book at that time. I guess is why I was reading it. I don't know. Certainly haven't read it again. Anyway.
Yeah, no kidding.
So after giving him up, I had days of not sleeping. I had a lot of pain. I did a lot of writing about the experience. Nick would do what he could to comfort me. And I got paranoid from the not sleeping and depression, and just, it was not pretty. And my poor siblings, remember me coming out of the room and, with my paranoia, get down, they're coming, and things like that. So all of the losses kind of came out because my dad, I was very close to him, was divorced, my parents. And so it was a dark time. And so for Nick, and he could probably speak to it, he'd do what he can and, try to get me out and, do things and distract and things. But it was just, we were both hurting so much ourselves. And I got help. I had family support and counseling, and was actually admitted to a hospital for just a few days, I believe it was, until I at least got sleep and got, where I could function. I don't know that Nick had the same support, but it was very difficult, just to be and to exist. And I remember clearly after the hospital seeing a counselor and I'm saying, well, do you love Nick? And at that point, you're like, I don't know anything right now. All I know is I'm hurting. You know what I mean? And I feel like I thought I did the right thing, but did I do the right thing? And who Nick mentioned, there was 2 people that said that if I didn't get our baby back, my life would be ruined. And that's a pretty heavy thing to hear. So that was difficult too. So I don't know if I answered your question or if I got off.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, Bob, I'm curious what's going on for you.
Yeah, it's I'm away at college at this point.
Yeah.
And pretty detached from what's happening at this point. It wasn't early on, but at this point, until my girlfriend Margie, who became my wife Margie, was filling me in on what's happening. And it's right before I come home on spring break. So as I come home, Brian's born the end of February, the 24th. Is that right? 29th, 28th?
24th.
24th, yeah. And I come home on spring break, sometime early in March for my spring break. And when I come back, and again, Margie was warning me of what was happening for Kath and Nick, and I just had no idea. And I come back, and I just remember all of us sleeping in the living room floor, just to be there with Kathy. And it was just so painful to see what she was going through. And Margie had the intuition, and then seeing Kathy in the hospital after that, because I think right after that, while I was still on spring break, she went into the hospital, and seeing her there was just so mind-boggling. It's the best way, and painful. And just see what Nick was going through, see what Kathy was going through, see what all my family was going through. I'll never forget Margie saying, Kathy needs her dad. And she took her first paycheck and paid for my dad to fly down from West Virginia. And I really believe that was key, that Margie had this intuition that her loss with Brian was triggering her loss with my dad. And Kathy and my dad were really close. And just Margie's compassion at that point. Later Margie and Kathy became labor and delivery nurses and worked together for 20 years. So the irony in the story,
Yeah, no kidding.
But, for me, that I was in denial until then. And then it was just overwhelming just to see it.
Yeah. Kathy, were you?
I just had
Was there something you were going to say?
question. One thing to add about Margie. She was in nursing school at that time when I was pregnant, and she was the one that reached out to me and brought me maternity books to learn about pregnancy, and was very instrumental and supportive at that time. Margie and I are very, very close. Yeah.
And her mom, too, was supportive, who was also a nurse.
Okay, so I'm really removed. I obviously know all the characters, and I know Bob really well, but here's what my experience is, and maybe I'm representing all the people that will be listening to this, is there's a deafening silence that I keep getting hit by. And so far in the episode, Brian hasn't spoken.
Yep, in my heart too.
And Brian didn't speak in the reality of the story too. So there's this, I'm having this weird feeling right now going, but Brian, like I'm like, I'm feeling for him, and we're talking about Brian, and the weird part is he's sitting right at the table. So Brian, I in some ways I'm like, do we go to Brian right now? Do we cut to Brian, or is that Bob?
That's my heart. That's my heart too.
So Brian, it's just, to see your face now. I know our listeners can't, but this is like a dramatic scene for me, because we've been looking at Nick and Kathy this whole time, and they're talking about you, and you've been sitting at the table. I don't even know what to say. I'm just like, I'm happy to look at your face and see you.
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of love and a lot of emotion, and it's overwhelming. So I'm trying to keep my emotions in check so that we could have a conversation and share what's in my heart. But I'm just filled with gratitude for the love.
Yeah. How come? Like what gratitude? Like what, because what's making you feel gratitude? Could we try to be more specific about it? As you're hearing your mom and dad talk, and you have names for them, and I want to honor, I heard you say Papa Nick and Mama Kathy, or
yes, because they're my parents and my adoptive parents that I will never turn my back on. So it's hard to juggle, and so I don't feel like I should call them by their name, but I don't want to say mom and dad when I have another mom, but they are my mom and dad. So it's, you know,
that's such a beautiful, that struck me before we clicked record. I felt you loving them really well and honoring your adoptive parents as well, because the people that we'll be talking to in the rest of the series will be the adoptive parents. And so that's just going to be such an interesting dynamic. But Brian,
not yours, parents,
not yours, but sorry, our other guests that we're going to have. So this is such a unique experience we're having. But Brian, obviously you don't remember any of this from psychology, what they call it, an episodic memory. Everything's implicit. So your body might be remembering and whatever. But so you were saying gratitude, and could you talk more about what are you feeling grateful for as you hear the story? And then two, anything that comes to mind about this season, or, we'll get to later when you probably learned you were adopted. But first of all, gratitude. Why are you grateful right now?
Well, I look at it, they're 18-year-old kids who just had trauma in their lives, that with Mom Kathy's father, who was a great man, but through his sin, he left the family and they were on their own. So I put myself in her shoes and what she was going through, and the love that Papa Nick and support gave her. And there was a purity that was pure love. Now the sin was having sex before the marriage, but there was love there. There was God's love. And I am a product of that, out of that love. But I'm also a product of the pain that they felt and the separation that I feel, and the pain that Mom Kathy had in my life. I felt that pain. I felt that same pain. So the gratitude and sacrifice that she went through, because the easy thing to do would be to have an abortion. That would be the easy thing to do, but what would she give up to take the easy road? But instead, she chose the hard road to go through the pregnancy at 18 years old out of love and sacrifice.
Wow.
And so that's what I'm so grateful for, and the love that's in the family, even though everybody was hurting, deeply wounded from what happened in their family, to be able to have love to give. And there's a quote by St. Augustine that I really relate to. that I had to write down that I'd like to read.
Yeah.
In my
Yeah,
deepest
please.
wound, I saw your glory and it dazzled me. That means so much to
Oh,
me.
uh,
So
oh, you're so lovely, Brian.
and,
It's so good.
well, I'm being overcome with emotion that I want to embrace and not push away. But if you, I'll pause for
Yeah,
a
I
second
hear you.
to.
Yeah.
I hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Can I add to that emotion a little bit?
Yeah.
Just been such a gift, Brian, to get to meet you and to love you. And just for our listeners, one of the beautiful things in my life right now is I haven't met Brian in person, but we meet every week on Zoom with Papa Nick and your dad and our brother-in-law Ken, who's adopted, and my brother Wayne, who are your uncles. And we get to share life together and share our faith together. And it's been such an incredible gift. Your dad, Bud, and he's suffering from Parkinson's. But your love for him, and you're there taking care of him, and your mom, Cindy, is there sick. Just seeing your love for both sides, and even though you're in pain in the middle of it, it's just such a gift to see that, and such a gift to finally meet my nephew. That, for a long time during this, you were always Kath and Nick's son that they gave up, and I was always praying for you as Kath and Nick's son. And then as Kath and Nick and I would talk about their pain and their desire to meet you, all of a sudden you became my nephew. Somewhere along the line, it was many years after they gave you up for adoption. And then I started praying for my nephew without knowing your name. We used to call you Luke because that was the name that they had given you. So I'd pray for Luke. And every birthday, we'd all talk about Luke. And so that, I don't want to jump ahead of the story, but just the joy that it is for me to know you, and can't wait to Thanksgiving to you and your daughter come up and
Thank you so much.
we get to meet you. Yeah.
I don't want to jump ahead in the story either, but soon after we met is when I got to know you and your ministry and your podcast with Jake, and it's meant so much to me. I've learned so much. I've been touched so much. So thank you. For not just for me, but what you do for healing with individuals and families and the church. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Now you're adding to it.
Let's just pause a second. I am floored. We leapfrogged a little bit to give context, and so if I understand right, and Brian, you were given up for adoption, and then there's this large chunk of time where you're living your life now in your adoptive family. And the language that I know is called an open adoption or a closed adoption, where a closed adoption is the biological parents. So Papa Nick and Mama Kathy in this scenario wouldn't have contact with you. But if that's the case, so I'm assuming it was a closed adoption because they didn't stay in touch with you this whole time. Then all of a sudden you reconnect with this family. Because I remember hearing that part of the story, Bob telling me, and I said, "You say that again?" And the reconnection is starting to happen, but there's this huge chunk of time where nobody knows what's going on in each other's lives. And then, Brian, you come back into their lives. And Bob, did I hear this right? That you now meet weekly with Ken and Wayne. So all the uncles and Brian are getting together to talk on a regular. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, with his dad, with both of his dads.
Okay, so Bud is your biological. I mean, Bud is your adoptive father,
Yes.
Brian,
Bud and Cindy.
and then Bud and Cindy, and then Papa Nick. So Bud, Papa Nick, Bob, Ken, and Wayne are all getting together to talk on a regular
Yes.
basis. What the heck? Like, okay, so that's just that only happens in the kingdom of God.
Yeah, it is the
Um,
kingdom. So let's go back if we can. If that's okay. Can we go back and wait for the rest of
Sure.
the story?
I'm along for the ride, man.
All right.
You pick where you want to go.
Okay. So, Brian, as you hear your mom and dad, Kath and Nick, talk about that moment in the hospital and what happened afterwards, what happens in your own heart?
I feel for them. I feel compassion and love for them. And I also feel that maybe that's the genesis of my wounds, that separation. And that pain maybe was transferred. The pain that Mama Kathy was feeling, maybe I took on that some way, somehow. I can't explain it, but it's something that I feel. I feel both the love and the pain.
Okay.
You know?
Can you describe the pain that you feel in that?
The abandonment and it's almost like I've detached in a way. My whole life I've been detached. And I'm coming to grips with the parts within, like I've learned about and a lot through your podcast of the internal family systems and the parts within us. And it's just it's strange that Mama Kathy turned to a secular book that somehow was related, although in a distorted sense.
That's good.
But there are parts within us that need to be healed. And I feel like when I hear you ask what I felt, wow, this truly is part of God's plan or providence. We all want healing. And I think it was on one of your recent podcasts where you explored is pain itself or suffering part of healing? And how do we deal with that? How do we make it redemptive? How do we carry the cross for good and not just for our own, okay, I'm going to take this on as my identity, I'm a martyr, woe is me, but truly be redemptive. And we were talking about that this morning when we had our prayer session. What makes it redemptive? And I think it's the sacrifice and the pain that's in your heart. How do you get from out of your own head and feeling sorry for yourself and helping others? I think that's, to me anyway, I'm still learning about all this, but that's the redemptive part of it. And it's just when hearing the story just now, the pain that they had Mom Kathy had just gone through as a family, that was earth shattering. They had a beautiful family in Pittsburgh, and to have that all crumble. And now she's a teenager that found love, and she wasn't doing anything wrong. But the act itself might have been a sin. But so I just realizing where I came from and what I'm a product of, and both the pain that was there, but the love and the love of the whole family that I'm a part of now. And that's what I'm overwhelmed by, is the love, but also the pain that's there too, and how we deal with that pain.
Yeah, beautiful, Brian.
But Brian, can you keep talking to us about how life was for you? Like, when did you find out that you were adopted? How did Bud and Cindy navigate that for you? And what was that like? And did the pain come up in other areas of your life? And then you were like, man, why do I have this ache? Or I don't know. What was that like for you as you're a little guy and then you start to get older and you can talk and you start going to school and stuff like that. At least I'm assuming all that's how it went. What was it like for you to know you were adopted? How'd you find out? That kind of stuff.
Well, I guess it was around 5 or 6 years old, maybe kindergarten or first grade. I don't remember the exact age that I was told that I was adopted, and I was shocked. I was kind of hurt by it. I said, well, you mean I don't come from you? You're not my parents? So I didn't want to speak of it anymore. I said, can we just act like, I'm part of you. I'm part of the family. And they often spoke, if you want to know your real parents, we could help with that. And I said, please don't speak of that. That's very hurtful to me. You're my real parents.
Yeah.
You provided everything that I need and all the love. I always, in my imagination, I thought maybe, the only thing that I knew that I had very young parents. So I thought maybe they had a relationship and had gone their separate ways. And I never envisioned what a beautiful family I come from. I never envisioned that. In fact, I was thinking maybe the worst, that maybe I came drugs or alcohol or worse, so I've been amazed to hear the family that I do come from, but I always want to keep my love for both families. And but it's so interesting to hear the story and to see the photograph of when Papa Nick and Mama Kathy held me in that hospital, and to see that photograph and then look back at my albums and see just days later this other family taking me in. It would be a beautiful thing if I could put it to a PowerPoint or make it a visual, and narrate it. Maybe one day I'll do that. But the love that I got from my adoptive family and my folks, Bud and Cindy and their parents, very loving family, especially my grandmothers on both sides. We come from large Catholic family, many, many children. And they acted like I was beloved. And I see the pictures and it just, they're gone now, but
you love
I have so much gratitude for that.
Yeah.
And the love.
Wow. Oh man. Oh, you are adopted into a beautiful family, and you were received, it seems like, as one of the family. And when you find out that you're adopted, it hurts, because there's this reality that disrupts the security that every kid wants, right? I can hear you going, please, can we not talk about that? Because I can only imagine what that would have done to you in your soul and your heart, to just go, there's almost like a double disconnection now, because your parents are saying to you, I can't raise you, and they give you up for adoption. And then your adoptive parents are saying, you're not actually ours in a way. And so the hurt of that, I can only imagine how you, and it makes sense, makes so much sense where you just said, please, I can't handle that, because where do I belong? And I know when Bob and I's work with folks who have been adopted, that the abandonment wounds and the displacement of the soul is so deep often. Brian, can you talk to us a bit more about how did life continue on for you? Did the abandonment stuff affect you? Did you start noticing like, gosh, I'm always feeling lonely, or did it just kind of cruise along? What was it like for you as you grew up?
Well, my adoptive parents, Bud and Cindy, then adopted my sister, Jessica, as well. So she was born a few years after me, and she adopted about 4 years after me. So she's a great person, and I love her so much, and I love my family so much. But then a few years after that, they had a son, which they didn't think they were able to have children. But they eventually, we actually moved from Miami to Western North Carolina, beautiful part part of the country in the mountains there, and it just happened like a miracle child. So I was so happy to have another sibling and a young brother, but a part of me felt I'm not a part of this. That's the family, and I'm just, maybe a foster kid, or in my mind, I'm just
Yeah.
this is a temporary thing. After a while, I'm going to be pushed out. In my mind, I had that insecurity, and it never happened. Quite the opposite. To this day, my parents, who are getting older now, still love me and so much, and they're so happy for this reunion with my birth family, and I see the love. It's given me an appreciation for their love even more, and I want to give back to them now. Say thank you. That's gratitude for them, everything that they've done. But yeah, I felt a little bit outside of the circle, and I have a unique personality that I felt like I didn't fit in with others. I've explored, well, maybe, in retrospect, maybe I'm on the spectrum. I just never was diagnosed. Thoughts like that, like maybe there's a reason why I'm so different and I feel so disconnected from everybody. There's got to be a reason for it. So I'm still at my age. I'm exploring that and trying to get to the bottom of where those wounds come from and why I still feel them so much. Even though there's been so much healing, there's also the wounds. But maybe it's meant to carry the wounds. Just redemptively and be able to love through the wounds.
Yeah. I want to pick up in a little bit about your prayer before the reconciliation. But before we do that, I want to hear from Kath and Nick about that period of time, from the early years and then kind of the development of what happened in your lives and with I know this story, but the rest of the world doesn't know your story.
So 48 years ago, give or take, we leave the hospital. We leave my son. I'm leaving my son with the prominent thought that I'll never see him. I'll never meet him. But what also, and so we leave the hospital. We go off to college together. We get married. We start our careers. We start to have a family. We raise a family, and we're grandparents. Last 2 years, we live a blessed, full life together. Brian was always present to me and to Kathy. So like we said, we celebrated his birthdays. We acknowledged him. We gave him a name. We refer to him as Luke, and always hope for the best. But there's somewhat of an emotion, as far as my relationship with Brian, there's somewhat of an emotional roller coaster here. I had to believe, and I still have to believe, that God was in the middle of this decision and that this was what was best for Brian. I had to believe that. And in not hearing him over the years, there would be fear. Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in addiction? Is he all right?
Wow.
And for the most part, feeling I'll never know. And and that's grief and that's loss. And so just subtly, not even consciously, I'm putting this experience in a closet. I don't want to feel the pain, the grief, the reality that we'll never see. So, I just kind of sweep that under the rug, but then there's hope. And it's like, well, maybe we will be reunited. Maybe God's promise is, he's fine. And so I kind of took the lead. I made several efforts to get on registries. And in doing Google searches, contacting the hospital where he was born and trying to see if I could access records. And it was always dead ends. And it was always, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe he's in great hands. Maybe he's happy. We're not hearing from him. Maybe he doesn't need to have this. Maybe he doesn't need it. So it's going back and forth to that, a desire to reach out and meet him and find out what's going on. And then the reality that this may never happen. Brian and I were up over midnight last night talking about some of these dynamics and what that was like. And so I had to kind of detach from him. And again, not consciously, not willfully, but that's what I was doing. I was detaching from my son, who I'll never see. And that was difficult. And then, whenever, and that now my other children know about him, and they're, from the beginning, they were fascinated. They want to meet their brother. And so that would fire another hope, that, and there was times that, they wanted to pursue a search, and do Google searches. And so whenever any of that started to happen, it always ended up in a dead end. And then I don't know if you want to hear the grand finale yet. Okay.
Let's hear from Kathy,
Kathy first,
and then we'll go to the grand finale.
Right.
Yeah. Kathy, what was this like for you in this time? So you're in a lot of pain. You're going to university. You're trying, like, it's in some ways you're continuing with life. You and Nick reconnect and get married. So I'm hearing from Nick here about his pain, like he just had to almost separate himself to cope, and yet he was trying to connect, which is just a beautiful, like his heart never stopped wanting to pursue his son. It's just a powerful, I was thinking of the prodigal son story of like where Nick's going after and
going out and looking every day.
And looking, every day. And Kathy, what was this season like for you?
Well, after getting beyond that deep depression, starting to move forward, and at that point in my life, just finished high school, not sure what I wanted. And knowing that I really didn't care what I did. I really wanted to be a mom. That was what I knew at that point. And it was really my mom that pushed and that felt very strongly about me going to college because of her experience, after being divorced and having 7 children, then she went back to college. So it was so important to her. And since I had applied, I went ahead. And really college for me was the first time since the divorce anyway, because we all took on some parenting roles and were taking care of each other during that phase when we moved. So going off to college was the first time I got to kind of think about me and what I liked and what I wanted to do, and that was healing in many ways. In giving up Brian for adoption, I felt like we gave up that right and we had no right to interfere. I felt very strongly about that. I felt like it was a closed adoption. We had no choice at that time. And we put both Nick's last name and my last name on the birth certificate, and we gave him a name. We did registries, and we were both in agreement with all of that. But we felt like if he wanted to find us, he could find us, and and we had to have the belief, like Nick spoke of in my heart, that he was in a better place. He was better off, with his family than what we could have provided. And there was some fear of, I don't know if I could handle it if I found out otherwise. So there was always that there too. So I very much wanted to meet him. I really was hopeful, but not really believing that it would happen as the years went by. I mean, it just became, okay. So I did the best I could to move forward. And certainly, I'm sure my decision to do labor and delivery was not by accident. And I was able to share with other parents that were giving up their baby for adoption in a private way when it was appropriate, that, that's a very hard decision. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. And just, trying to give them, encouragement. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but it was, moving forward, but never forgetting, always praying, always, present, journaling from time to time, praying about it a lot, and just trying to discern God's desire in this way. There was many times when all our children and we would be in a certain place and we'd be looking for someone that looked like our other son, Casey, or like our children. And there was one time when we were convinced that we were going to go to, it was in South Florida, ironically enough, because he was in South Florida, but we had no idea that we were going to meet him, and just looking, it was actually at Casey's soccer game, and we thought we were going to meet him at this stadium. It was kind of funny. So there was different periods of that, but always the desire and the yearning, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah. If I can interject here a second, I can remember a real evolution for both of you over time in terms of dealing with the pain and dealing with the possibilities. And I can remember particularly a marriage encounter. I don't know whether it was when you made your marriage encounter or you were on the team of marriage encounter, when you started opening up a dialogue about that. Do you both remember that? That felt like a real turning point in your hearts towards like being able to talk about it and being able to be open about the possibilities of facing the pain. Can either of you speak to that?
No question, marriage encounter, making a weekend, marriage encounter, being a part of the presenting team was very impactful in our lives, and our ability to grow and communicate our emotions and our experiences, and taking time to do that, and being busy parents with small kids, just how important that was to connect. And the reality of having a son that we couldn't be in contact with was always present. And yeah, I think over time, as we grew as a couple and got older and wiser, more mature, it became much easier to talk about that. The hurt was always there. The distance that we may never be in contact with him was always there, and that was painful. But we got good at talking about it and talking to our kids about it. It seems like every birthday that Brian had, one or more of the kids were present, our other children. It was always conversation. It was open. Wonder how he's doing. What do you think about reaching out to him again? And what have you guys done? And that was healthy for us, for our family, for us as a couple.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Kathy, anything you wanted to add to that?
The dialogue was definitely helpful in that communication, because it was a period of time that, like I said early on when we first started dating, that we couldn't talk about it. I mean, we talked about it, but it was painful, right? So years later, being able to have some perspective and sharing our feelings about it, like I didn't really realize how alone Nick felt in his suffering, because I have a bigger family, but I had a lot more support than Nick did through the experience.
The reality and the experience of the adoption, as far as I'm concerned, there wasn't many people that I shared that with. My most intimate circle of family. So, some of it was just pain that I would keep from others. And to fast forward, when we were reunited, I was just so excited. Like everybody I would encounter, I would share. I got to tell you this story. I shared it with all my colleagues. I have this funny story. Kathy and I were out eating, and I had this urge. She was in the bathroom. The waiter was coming. I had this urge to tell him, "Hey, I got to tell you about what just happened. You want to hear it?" So I got to tell the waiter was a phrase that I was just bursting with this readiness. I mean, it was joy as opposed. The opposite of that was the pain that I kept to myself.
Can you transition into Brian's last birthday, the birthday this year, and the discussion on his birthday, and then we'll go back and forth between that and then Brian's prayer?
Yeah. This was in February, and it was actually on his birthday that my mom, my brother Wayne, my sister Margaret, for sure, and I don't remember, and Nick and I, we were doing morning reading and prayer, and praying for Brian.
Was Lauren there too?
I can't remember if Lauren was there. Sorry, Laura. I think she was. But there was family members, and we were praying for Brian. And then Wayne was asking about our feelings, and about if we ever thought we'd be reconnected, and where were we emotionally with that. And Mom was sharing that her desire before she died was to meet Brian. So we were just praying for him and sharing him. And that was, February 24th of this year. And I don't know where you want to go from there, but it was March, the second weekend in March, that we actually, via Ancestry, got a message.
Yeah.
So I could stop there and you could let Brian talk if you want or whatever.
Yeah. I'd like Brian to talk about his
Okay,
prayer.
yes.
And then, Jake, anything you want to ask before that?
No, this is the edge of my seat moment. I'm like, so you guys are not paid by Ancestry.com. We'll just make that note.
No paid contributors here.
Yeah.
Although that could be
a tie-in, a sponsorship tie-in.
Oh man, yeah, you
for the
guys
ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Brian, what happens that so obviously the cat's out of the bag a little bit, Ancestry.com somehow, but there's this prayer, like bring us into all this.
So leading into this, my daughter, who's now 19, she always wanted to do the Ancestry thing. So she's the one that went on Ancestry, did the DNA test, and it matched to Mama Kathy. So right away, my daughter,
Whoa.
Caitlin, came to me with this exciting news, but I didn't know that was my mother. I see a photograph. I said, that could be my sister. That could be my cousin. I wasn't sure, but it was exciting. Some time had gone by, but before leading up to this, though, I was kind of in my wounds, my adoptive parents getting older and suffering their, what they're going through and everything. And I'm divorced, and some of my wounds are abandonment, rejection, and my daughter going off to college, everything. I feel like a season now of, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
So I prayed harder than I prayed in a long time for the Lord to heal my heart, to heal my broken heart and my wounds. And it seemed like shortly after that, and a story I was telling the folks today, I went to a holistic doctor, a friend of a friend who was a chiropractor, and I didn't know that it was going to turn out this way, but he was big on forgiveness and gratitude. Those were key things that he said to me. And then this happened. This match on Ancestry happened, and all the grace that's come out of it, and all the beauty and God's love, and that prayer that I prayed from the heart, it just felt like it was answered directly. So it's restored my faith. I've always had faith in the Lord, but I had the foundation in the Catholic Church, went through the sacraments, but in my teenage years and my 20s, I kind of strayed away from the church. This has brought me back. It's just been a beautiful thing in my life, and that's why I'm just grateful for all of this. And the next thing that I want to do is on mute. You know how we, hearing Papa, Mama talk, you mute some things, some parts of you that are painful. It's almost like you hit the mute button, and I've done that a lot in life. I don't know if that's what disassociation is, but hitting the button to turn those parts of me back on, even though they're the hurt, the wounded, turning that back on and facing that and being whole, that's my journey now. And I'm hoping on the other side of that is to help others in some way, even if it's in small ways. so that healing could take place for people. And our country and our world is going through such tough times right now, and
Yes.
the culture, and it's hard times right now for a lot of people, and a lot of people are turning to their sins
Yeah.
because they're seeking the comfort,
Mm.
their pleasures, but inside all of us, there's a child that just wants love, that just wants, and I want to tap into my child, but also have compassion for everybody and see the inner child in them.
Yeah.
So God's opened my eyes to a lot of this, and learning to get out of my own head and think of others, and it's been just a beautiful thing for me and my whole family. Now both sides are close, and it's
Oh.
just man, if that's not an answer to a prayer, I don't know what is.
No kidding.
So although I've strayed away, and wallowed in pity and sin instead of seeking the Lord, this has brought me back, and I'm just so thankful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, can you bring us in?
Right.
Oh, sorry, Bob. I want to hear I don't know, Bob, where you're going to go. The first, like the connection. When did you when?
Yeah, I think we need to start with Nick on
Okay.
that and then come
Okay.
back. Okay.
This is a cool story. I probably should charge to share this story. It's so cool. So it's 48 years. We've left Luke, Brian, we left him in the hospital 48 years. And through all of this comings and goings, I pretty much figured it's probably for the best. It's probably God's will that we'll never meet him, and had to submit to that and accept that. And try to accept it positively that, if God's hand's in this, things are just as they should be in his life. So getting back to Ancestry, it's a Saturday afternoon. It's pouring rain outside. Kathy and I are sitting at the same table that we're at right now. It's surreal that Kathy and I are at this table and Brian's sitting right here at this table. And I'm at this table and I'm on Ancestry.com. I had some information I was pursuing. And on this page, there's a chat bar. And this chat pops up. And he says, hello, I forget the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of that we're showing, this is on Kathy's computer, so this message is going to Kathy. I'm seeing that you're called a close relative in a DNA search that we're doing. My name is Brian. I'm from Miami. Now my heart starts pounding.
Oh.
I was born in 1975. And I was given up for adoption in the name of the hospital. And I am pounding.
Mercy Hospital.
Mercy
right?
Hospital. My heart's pounding, and it's like there's no question this is him.
Huh.
And I had been for the previous 15 minutes. I've been telling Kathy. I've been passing on boring, ancient relative story. I got a great grandmother in Ireland. Look,
Yeah. Right.
She's like, all right. She's. So I said, Kathy, I look up, I get done reading this. My heart's pounding. I'm like, Kathy, you need to listen to this. And at first I get this feeling from her, like, will you leave me alone?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about your dead relatives.
Yeah.
So I read it and I see the certainty in her eyes, like, oh my God, this is him. She jumps out of the table. I mean, jumps out of the table. She comes across and she's reading, she wants to read for herself what I just read to her.
Yeah.
And we are like, oh my God, our hearts are pounding. And then we'll let you take it from here, Kathy.
We were overwhelmed. And I don't know what time of day, but it's like, okay, who do you tell first, right? It was the middle of the night because our oldest daughter was in Europe. So we figured we couldn't call her. Our other daughter was at work. So I picked up the phone, and who's quick to answer is our son, Casey. And we know he did the other ancestry test and that he had been actively looking in the past year or so. So I called our son, Casey, and told him what we know. He's like, Mom, is that all you got? But what I hear later is he's jumping up and down. Literally, he was so excited. And so I don't know how many minutes, hours passed that we did the chat with our children. And even Nicole, it was the middle of the night, woke her up. Kate went, from work, and Casey, and we're talking for hours. And then everybody's online at the same time doing Google search, because now we knew his name, and everybody's finding out little tidbits about Brian Johan.
Oh my word.
And talking about, okay, so what are we going to do now? Nick and I thought, okay, well, let's give this a couple days and see if he responds, because Nick did respond on there,
On the chat.
just giving very brief information on the site, the Ancestry site chat. But who looks at that very often? Nick hadn't been on it in months, and I probably hadn't been on it in weeks, and I hadn't seen the chat. So they're like, that's not very efficient. And so everybody decided that it was okay if we didn't hear anything by the next day, that Casey could be the one to make contact.
Yeah.
So the next morning, very literally the next morning, 8 a.m, I remember my phone on mute or silence, and it was buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. So I go ahead and look at the message. I'm barely awake. And it's like, Mom, are you awake? Call me. And he had text or message, and I'm not sure how the exact, medium, but sent a message to Brian. Maybe it was email. And Brian responded, I believe, at this point. And Casey was over the moon excited. And it kind of went from there. And Brian can probably say what he remembers, if that's good.
Yeah.
From there.
At this point in telling the story, I'm overwhelmed. Because
no kidding.
I've been at loss of words, because it's maybe the first time that I've felt God's presence so much, so intensely. And my words can't do it justice of the feeling of love, in God's love and its mercy, and I've just been so touched, and the love now that I feel from both sides of the family.
So did Casey reach out to you, and you got an email from him?
He did, actually. I guess he found me on social media.
Okay.
And wrote to me, and just reading the words like I am now, the emotions just came out like living waters, this, I'm trying to do it's just God's love, that's.
Yeah. So you're absolutely overwhelmed at getting this email from your biological brother.
My brother.
Who says, here we are and here you are. And like, it's almost like this, like you see somebody across the room and you look at each other, and it was through email. I'm just making this up, and then you go, oh my, you're the one. And you're just frozen in your tracks, and interiorly it feels like you're overjoyed and you're crumbling all at the same time. Just this mixture of emotion. Brian, when does it get like, so you obviously reply, now everybody's going crazy with the, oh my word, when do you actually meet in person? And what happens then?
That was about 2 weeks later.
Holy smokes.
Later, I
Yeah. If I can fill in a piece here too. Our family's going crazy.
Yeah.
Just all the back and forth in tears. Yeah. Nick calls me that morning, shares that with me, and it just overwhelming. And then I tell Kath and Nick about the virtual conference that Sister Miriam and I are doing starting on that Monday. Yes. And Brian and his parents sign up for that and go through the Healing the Whole Person virtual conference.
Did you know that was them who were Did you know who that was signing up?
No, they signed up because Kath and Nick told them.
It was after we knew each other. Yeah. Brian jumped on it.
Yeah.
Oh my word.
So it was like the Monday after this Saturday or something. That was crazy, the timing.
Yeah. and a very significant weekend of one brother's birth and another's death, birthday. So Brian came to our home in Jacksonville, and of course our other three were going nuts, and they all wanted to be here. And because the oldest one's in Europe and couldn't leave right that quick
Yeah,
at short
yeah.
notice, she talked Brian and his brother and sister, Casey and Caitlin, into not meeting him when we met him so that they could all meet him together.
Oh man.
So just Nick and I had the weekend with Brian. He came to our
Oh.
house, and we had
That was on the 25th,
25th of March.
which is the Feast of the Annunciation,
Yep. Very significant.
which is my brother Wayne's birthday, my brother Dave's birthday into heaven. It's a very special day
No kidding.
in family history.
Wow.
So it was surreal. I mean,
No
surreal is the feeling, the best description I can give of how it felt that we were really meeting him. I mean, we were just like blown away.
Right. And so you guys connect, and I mean, some of this is so sacred in a way that I want to reverence the story by letting it be yours. For me, I have a final question that I'd like to ask each one of you to answer. And Bob, maybe you have something else as well, but I'm intentionally leaving holes because I want our audience to just go, what? I want to hear more. And yeah, beautiful. You're going to have to wait for the book or whatever is going to happen with that. But here's the question that I'd love to ask each one of you is a hard question. You didn't know it was coming, but what did all of this show you about the heart of God?
Oh, what a great question to begin talking about God's heart, right?
Yeah.
It showed me he's always, and this was a concept that has really landed hard on me, heavy in this awareness in a great way. Starting about a month ago, I've been seeing and looking at this experience. He's always there. He's always listening. He always cares about my situation.
Wow.
And so anyway, that's, God's presence, God's will in this entire 48-year life has been very present.
Oh,
thank you, God.
Yeah. Kathy, how about you?
Just God's love, just being so grateful and blessed just by God that, in his timing, and truly you hear that all the time, you pray for things and it may happen or may not, and may not be what you think it will be. Just, I was so overwhelmed by his love and by having this gift in bringing our family together that I thought would never happen. Right. So it just showed me his love, his great love and his heart and his mercy and his healing power.
Wow. Oh, Brian, how about for you? What has this showed you about God's heart?
Well, it's given me an identity now, something that I was struggling with for many years. The identity of being beloved and being God's child, and just feeling tangibly God's grace and love, and learning that we really shouldn't push away from our wounds or hide from them or escape. We, in a weird way, have to embrace them. And it's hard. It's the harder path. It's easier to escape. It's easier to turn to drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever the case, addictions. That's the easy thing, but the hard path is the right path. God's path, that's been revealed to me now, so that's why I say I'm just grateful.
Yeah. Oh, Bob, I'm going to give you the last word here. The thing that I'm noticing, I'll share very quickly for me. This is what I'll ask myself the same question. I feel like what I'm getting to witness is the image I have is of God the Father for some reason. You know, when something amazing happens and somebody throws their head back and they have this huge smile on their face, and at the exact same time tears are running down their cheek. I just have this image of God the Father throwing his head back, laughing and loving the goodness that he's just done that's miraculous. You can't make this stuff up. And then him just going, I love it. Like, just delight in that regard. And the second thing I think that this makes me feel is I feel like this is a foretaste of heaven. When all these separations and dynamics, when God makes all things new and all things are made well and right again. And for all those adoptive parents out there who maybe this isn't their story, that this is a foretaste of what God has in mind for everyone. When every tear is wiped away, every sadness is removed, and all things are made right again. Like, this is restoring the glory of God's original design. It's just like, it's amazing. So, Bob, what about for you?
Well, you just said it, Jake. That's exactly been my experience since March when all this happened. It's just been this experience of just opening my heart. You know, I didn't realize the places of my heart that were still locked up, that we all just have been crying. I mean, just tears that connected to the broken places of broken attachments, you know, and it's been a preview of heaven. And my heart goes out to everybody who's listening, who's been adopted, given up for adoption, who hasn't had a reconciliation. Every parents who've given a child up for adoption or have had an abortion and living in the pain of that separation, or have had miscarriages. And every child who's cut off, whether it's through divorce or through death of a parent or through adoption, just cut off from the love of a parent, or every spouse who's been divorced. We're going to do a series on divorce coming up. But just what you said, just the promise of this is for you. You know, it may not be yet, yes, but this story is for every one of us who yield to the Spirit of God, who seek God, who pray the prayer that Brian prayed. And I think we've all prayed prayers like that, maybe with little faith and not enough desperation. But this is for every one of us. And yet, what a joy it is to share in my sister and brother-in-law's pain over these years, the joy. That was what hit me so much, is just, I didn't realize how much I'd felt their pain and the pain in the family and the joy of that being met, and my nieces and nephews and my mom and my dad, and, you know, just brothers and sisters in Brian's family, and just to feel the coming together and the answering of that. And so it's just led for a deeper love for me, for all of them in the middle of all of it.
Listeners, we hope that this has deeply blessed you. And I think our prayer is that you would, through this amazing testimony, come to realize what God is always up to, and that's the restoration of all things. And as we, like Brian has beautifully said in his story, and not run away from the pain, but look at the pain with God and open ourselves to the healing of God, all things can be made new. So we hope that this has blessed you, and we look forward to continuing on in our series here on adoption and hearing other experiences and other stories that people have had. So once again, Nick and Kathy and Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's so fresh and beautiful and wonderful. And I'm just grateful to the three of you so much. So listeners, thank you so much. And we will talk to you again soon.